It's been a while this week, huh? Let's discuss what happened while I was gone. Today's headliner is obviously the Davos Economic Forum, followed by a very unfortunate event in Ukraine, the tragedy of a helicopter crash in Brovary. How exactly Russia is planning on combating all of the Western weapons that Ukraine is receiving, because in international affairs, when it rains, it pours. With that, hi, my name is Yewleea and you're watching The Brief, where we discuss everything that happened in and pertaining to Ukraine in the week so far in under 20 minutes. Let's go. President Zelensky appeared at the summit in Davos via video and urged the allies not to delay the supply of weapons.
We are grateful for this support, but if that happened back then, immediately, that unity, that pressure on governments, on companies for the stake of the fight for the freedom, would Russia start this full-scale war? Would it bring all these losses upon Ukraine and upon the world? I'm sure that the answer to this question is also no. Now we see that the world listens and believes Ukraine, but there's also a certain expectations of the world as to how the situation will be resolved, what tools will work, what new can we create to prevent such aggressions in future, and how do we stop the brute force that has challenged everything that we all cherish and value. That's what the turning point means. Ladies and gentlemen, don't expect for the fatal shots being fired. Don't expect for Russia using their special weapons, either chemical, biological, and even more so nuclear. Do not give the aggressor the impression that the world would not resist enough. Protect the freedom and regular peaceful order in the world with the maximum efforts possible. This is what the sanction should be.
And then German Chancellor Olaf Scholz supported Zelensky's statements by saying that for the war in Ukraine to end, Russia must absolutely lose.
In order for the war to end, Russia's aggression must fail. That is why we are continuously supplying Ukraine with large quantities of arms in close consultation with our partners. This includes air defense systems like IRIS-T or Patriot, artillery and armored infantry fighting vehicles, marking a profound turning point in German foreign and security policy.
And then after that speech, and you won't believe it, he said that he was ready to allow the supply of Leopard 2 tanks to Kyiv. You got excited, didn't you? But there is a catch. Only provided that the United States supplies Ukraine with Abrams tanks, which we're gonna find out later they're not gonna do. And that decision earned Scholz this lovely meme that started circulating on Twitter. Then we got a glimpse of hope when Jens Stoltenberg confirmed that there were consultations between NATO countries in supplying Ukraine with tanks and other modern weapons. Then White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre reacted to the message of Olaf Scholz as saying that the countries themselves should be making the decision on whether to supply Ukraine these or those weapons, not counting in what other countries are doing. And then the Bundestag failed to vote on the supply of tanks to Ukraine, according to Deutsche Welle. And Jens Stoltenberg stepped in once again, reaffirming his previous statement as saying, Russian President Vladimir Putin is showing no signs of being ready for peace, and therefore he must understand that he cannot win on the battlefield. This is a turning point in the war, and a significant increase in support for Ukraine is needed. If we want a peaceful settlement through negotiations tomorrow, then today we should be provided with more weapons. Ukraine needs not only tanks, but armored vehicles, air defense systems, and ammunitions, according to him. And that statement was further supported by the Polish president, Andrzej Duda. According to him, in a few months or weeks, the decisive moment will come and we will understand whether Ukraine will survive. He also said that the Russian aggressor remains strong enough and is preparing a new large-scale offensive. And therefore, Kyiv needs to be provided with more weapons. And not just some weapons. Modern weapons. And then the forum came to a closure with this very positive statement from the ECB president Christine Lagarde, who said that the unemployment rate in Europe is the lowest in 20 years. I would like to emphasize a factor that strongly influences the development of inflation. This is the labor market. The labor market in Europe has never been as lively as it is now, and such trends are quite uniform. And that European labor market is actually growing due to an enormous amount of Ukrainian refugees, estimated at almost 4.9 million. The estimation is that from 25% to 55% of migrants are either employed or actively looking for a job in recipient countries. And this will increase the EU labor force by 0.3 to 1.3 million people. Not bad for Ukrainians just want to come to EU and receive aid. Huh? Meanwhile, in Ukraine, a massive tragedy happened this week in Brovary. A helicopter carrying a lot of the high postulated personnel of the Ministry of Internal Affairs of Ukraine crashed into a kindergarten. All 9 people aboard of the helicopter were killed, and that includes the Minister of Internal Affairs of Ukraine, Denis Monastyrsky, as well as the Secretary of State of Ukraine. From what we know so far, in total, 17 people were killed and 22 hospitalized with injuries. Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal instructed to immediately create a commission to investigate in detail the circumstances of the crash. The flight was a business trip to one of the hotspots of the Ukrainian front lines, and the helicopter was flying very low, as they do in Ukraine today, to avoid being shot down by Russian missiles. The reasons for this crash are still unknown and are being investigated. The allegations are that it could be sabotage, could be human error, because again, it is really hard to fly that low. And the last one is cited as there could be a technical malfunction. It is estimated at 70% likelihood that the reason is the first one. And to honor the memory of the Minister of Internal Affairs of Ukraine, Denis Monastyrsky, who tragically passed in this accident, his advisor, Anton Harashenko, published the last photo with him. The last report of the Minister of Internal Affairs, Denis Monastyrsky, to the President on the death of civilians in Dnipro caused by a Russian missile. This photo was taken yesterday. Blessed memory. And while we wait for the investigation to finish, let's have a moment of silence for all of the victims of the tragedy, not only the public figures, but also the children in the kindergarten and everyone who was inside. And all I can do here is transition to some better news coming out of my country to lighten the mood as much as possible under the circumstance. In Ukraine, we have this app on our phone for all things paperwork, IDs, passports, etc. And this application, Dia, was exported. And now the US is going to develop its own documents in a smartphone app, and it's going to be based on Dia. And not only that, US wants to share, as it wants to help export the Ukrainian government application or e-government application to other countries so they can emulate their own based on it as well. And here's a brief explainer of what it is.
Let's start with the basics. How much time and patience do you need to get a building permit in France or a birth certificate, let's say in Massachusetts, USA? First, you try to reach the relevant department by phone. After a few unfortunate attempts, you think of writing an email. Soon you change your mind and dare to apply in person. Cross the desert, swim the ocean, defeat the monster, wait for a few weeks. Oh, you forgot to submit some papers? Too bad. Start from the beginning. In Ukraine, all these services are available on tap in a mobile app and on the e-services portal Dia, a Ukrainian for action, a revolution in relations between the state and its citizens, which made public services in Ukraine finally serve people.
And if you want to see some other things that are different in Ukraine and might even be cooler than those in the US, I will leave the link to the full video by United24 in the description of the video below. And there are already some early adapters. Estonia is the first in the world to launch Emriik, which is an eGov application based on Dia. It's already being tested and the launch of it is scheduled for the middle of this year, right when the EU is going to examine the digitization of Ukraine. I'd like to take this moment to remind you really quick and kindly that the algorithm really likes a boost. So please don't forget to like this video, leave a comment, turn on all of your notifications, and of course, subscribe to my channel. Thank you so much. And this is the perfect time to move on to countries less digital. Meanwhile, in Russia. Putin's war in Ukraine apparently cast a serious doubt on his relationship with the Serbian president. Serbia is, was the closest ally that Russia had in Europe. But their president Alexander Vučić rejected Putin's territorial claims over Ukraine and said that the worst is yet to come. And there have been cracks showing and some distancing since the beginning of the full-scale invasion on February 24th. He then also said that despite them having lots of meetings in the recent years, he hasn't met with Putin since the beginning of the invasion. And that he just simply cannot support the war because for Serbians, Crimea is Ukraine, Donbas is Ukraine. All of those territories that Russia is trying to claim are Ukraine. Yikes. Is this like the political version of being dumped through text? Because it seems like that's just what happened, but on mass media. Speaking of Crimea being Ukraine, some more bad news for Vlad. The US softens its stance on Ukraine's strikes in Russian facilities on the peninsula. After months of negotiations, the Biden administration is finally beginning to understand and acknowledge that indeed, even though it might bring escalation, Ukraine has to have the potential and force to strike inside of Crimea. Since if we can show Russia that their control of the peninsula is truly at risk, it'll strengthen our position at any future potential negotiations. And scared Russia seems of Ukrainian strikes because they're transferring troops and ammunition to Belarus covertly. How? In railway tanks. And this is how these scammers are trying to deceive the satellite monitoring of cargo. Well, I guess it didn't work, because we know. And to really scare us and deliver the big blow, Russia might transfer its latest T-14 tanks to the Ukrainian front lines. But the British intelligence believes that it's unprofitable for Russia to use those, and if it does happen, it's going to happen in very limited quantities and for propaganda purposes. Any combat use of the T-14 is most likely a very risky decision for Russia. First of all, they can't afford to lose them because only a few dozen of those were produced, they weren't extensively tested, and therefore they can't really rely on them in combat. But of course, the Russian ambassador to Washington, Anatoly Antonov, begs to differ. He thinks the Russian army is going to destroy any weapons that the West sends to Ukraine. And it should be obvious to everyone. So it was during the Great Patriotic War, and so it will be now. Who's gonna tell him that the US supplied most of the weapons to Russia during the Great Patriotic War, World War II, in order for them to be able to even stand a chance against Germany, so their own weapons weren't doing the trick? Yeah, maybe he wants to take that into the account. I don't know, just a thought. And speaking of international affairs, looks like Russia still has one ally, Hungary, because it just blocked the next tranche of EU aid to Ukraine. Surprising. Not. But that's just a little hiccup on the way to victory because it looks like the Western world of politicians has finally awoken and is ready to destroy Russia militarily. The amount of modern weapons deliveries that has been announced this week has not been seen before during the entirety of the warfare. So when I say when it rains, it pours, it really pours. Denmark is transferring all of its Caesar howitzers to Ukraine. They have 15 in service already and are awaiting 4 to be delivered from France. That is 19 total. A new military aid package from Great Britain is going to be announced shortly, and according to Ben Wallace, it is going to include a whopping 600 Brimstone missiles. Estonia will provide Ukraine with a record 113 million military aid package. Thank you so much. Howitzers, ammo, grenade launchers, and support vehicles for artillery units. The US is preparing one of the largest packages of the military assistance to Ukraine to date, but without tanks. And they say that it has nothing to do with the fear of escalation or the risk of American weapons getting into Russian hands. So what is it then? Let me know what you think in the comments. I wonder. What is it then? Poland is expecting to deliver about 100 modern tanks to Ukraine together with allies. They're talking Leopard 2s. It is rumored that Poland said that they might just send those 40 tanks without waiting for permission from Germany, which is a risky move, but I think that that rumor is implanted to put further pressure on Germany to agree. Then a bombshell came out this week that Bulgaria, despite publicly saying that they will not be supporting Ukraine militarily, has transferred 1/3 of its military potential to Ukraine under the table. Now, it's a rumor, but wow. Do you believe it? What do you think? And then another bombshell is that Japan, remember when it decided to switch its military armaments and upgrade? Yeah. So Japan also decided to step up its position in aid. Prime Minister Kishida has a plan of action and is already actively involved in Ukraine's issues. Last week, he emphasized the importance of countering the Russian invasion, saying that the lack of objections from international community could provoke other international issues, like similar seizures and changes in the status of other territories around the world, including Taiwan. Basically saying, hey, act now so China doesn't take example and so Russia doesn't continue further, which is a strong statement from Japan. Then Iran, likely still under fear of severe sanctions from the US, came out and reiterated that Crimea is Ukraine, and despite excellent relations with Russia, they do not recognize the temporarily occupied territories as Russian, and they fully support the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine. By doing what? Selling Russia missiles? Yeah. Words versus actions. And then Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez said that despite what it looks like, Putin still has many allies in Europe who are now hiding their sympathies, but only a year ago visited him and praised his methods. And I think we know exactly who he's talking about. Berlusconi. Schröder. Anyways, he thinks that we must prevent these political forces from infiltrating state bodies and destroying Europe ultimately from within. And if I may say, I really do agree with him, because while everybody right now is hopping on the train of support for Ukraine, it is very evident that a lot of people are doing so to keep their positions and are playing a very long con. And we need to be very wary of that. And to end this newscast on a good note, the German economics minister Christian Lindner said that Germany no longer depends on Russian energy. And that is just one example of the change in their policy. Of course, they still rely on imports from other countries, but now it's the world market and there is no Russia in it. And I hope that the rest of the world will follow and there will be no Russia in it as long as it's a threat of waging wars of aggression on other sovereign countries. And before I leave, here is an illustrative look at some more weapons that were announced this week. With that, that's all I have for you for today. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this video or found it informative, please don't forget to give it a like, leave a comment, subscribe to my channel, turn on all of your notifications, of course, so you don't miss when the next one comes out, and as always, check your sources and don't fall for propaganda. And I will see you on Sunday.